Harris came out guns a-blazing in the media. The accolades seem to be flying. And the polling data is starting to become worrisome, it seems, for the Republicans. Just this week, Nate Silver released his newest model update, the Silver Bulletin, I think he's got it trademarked as nowadays. And in the model, he tries to estimate what does the polling data show us with respect to the Electoral College and the popular vote in the upcoming presidential election. Harris currently has a 42.5% probability of winning the Electoral College. Trump, 56.9%. Kennedy coming in at 0%. On the popular vote, Harris has a 57.1% probability of winning the popular vote, 42.9% probability for Trump. I guess I'll start it off with David Sachs. Sachs, given the momentum coming out of the gate since the announcement of Harris as the Democratic nominee and this recent polling data, what's your read on the landscape today? What's your read on where we stand and what's ahead here? And what do you take away from these polls?
Well, look, I think what happened is that Biden dropped out of the race. He abdicated. Harris took over, and it created a sense of euphoria on the part of the left because they thought they had a surefire loser with Biden and they were divided. And then once Harris replaced him, they thought, okay, now we got a shot and we can fully unify and get behind this new candidate. So what you've seen is over the past couple of weeks, the mainstream media has gone all out on behalf of Kamala Harris. And yes, this has led to a rise in the polls. But I think that the highs that Trump were at were always a little bit artificial in the sense that if the Democrats could field a candidate who could campaign, it was always going to be a close election. Biden was artificially depressed in the polling because he just couldn't campaign. He could barely read from a prompter. He couldn't do interviews. So I think you're seeing the race normalizing. This is going to be a close one. It's going to be a nail biter. But I think the question about this honeymoon period that Harris has right now is whether it's sustainable. I mean, she has not done any press interviews. She has not done any press conferences. She's not answered one question. She's not been asked one tough question by the media. She has only read from a teleprompter. She's only done scripted appearances. And yet, at the same time, she's basically been changing all of her policy positions and running from every position she ever stood for. So, for example, she said that she was in favor of single payer. Now she's against it. She said she was in favor of court packing. Now she's against it. She said she was against fracking. Now she's in favor of it. On the border, she said that we should consider abolishing ICE. Now, all of a sudden, she's in favor of more funding for Border Patrol. On crime, she used to take kind of the BLM position that, cops don't make us safer, to now she's saying that she's a cop and prosecutor herself. She used to be in favor of federal gun buybacks. Now she's against them. It just goes on and on. I mean, in the 2020 riots, she raised money for the legal defense of rioters. Now she's distancing herself from those positions. My point is this, is that after spending really her whole career staking out positions on the far left, she has now dropped all of these positions for political expediency. And the question is, what does she stand for at all? Does she just kind of blow with the wind and say whatever helps her win whatever the next election is? I mean, I think that's basically what's going on here. And normally what happens is the press would ask you that question, but she's been getting a free pass because the mainstream media has basically been operating as a division of the DNC, and they're not holding her to account in any way. They're not requiring her to answer any questions. And as a result, yes, you're seeing this bounce in the polls. But I think the question is, can she sustain this for 100 days? Can she really get through the entire election without having gone through a primary, without ever having to explain her positions on issues? And she just does these short scripted appearances. I just think that at some point over the next 100 days, that approach is just going to fall apart. She's going to have to do a debate. She's going to have to answer questions. And at that point, I think the bloom will come off the rose a little bit here, and you'll see the polls normalize.
Do you think that J.D. Vance has negatively affected the interest in Trump? That there's a lot of media coverage about J.D. Vance being potentially the wrong pick for vice president, and that he's creating more of a challenge for the president's campaign than a boom?
No, listen,
Okay.
anyone who Trump chose was going to be absolutely smeared by the other side and by the media. If it had been Doug Burgum, there would have been nonstop coverage of the 6-week abortion bill that he signed.
Right.
You could go down the list. I mean, look, what Democrats will say is we just want to see a moderate Republican. But when Mitt Romney ran, they were calling him a fascist. So the reality is that the mainstream media and the DNC, but I repeat myself, are going to smear anyone who's picked. At the end of the day, I don't think that it matters. What matters is the top of the ticket.
Chamath, what do you think about the Harris campaign, how it's going, and the momentum that is being projected in the media, and the polling data is clearly demonstrating an improvement over Biden's standings in the polls?
I mean, I think we had a situation where one candidate was not real. And so Sachs is right that a lot of the polling up until basically last week is not really reliable. Now you have this snapback effect, which is more about a lot of people that were coming around to this idea of voting for Trump because Biden was such a bad option, now flip-flopping. And so I think that's what explains the snapback. But Sachs is right. 100 days is a really long time. And what Nate Silver's poll essentially shows is if she wants to win, not the popular vote, because at this point now, 3 or 4 elections in a row, that just doesn't matter anymore. If you want to win the Electoral College and be the president, you got to go and win 5 states. And in order to do that, you have to be very precise on about 4 or 5 specific issues. And in the absence of her defining herself on those 4 or 5 issues, she's not going to win. She'll win the popular vote. But again, when people win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College, we've now gone through that enough times where that's just a fait accompli inside of American electoral politics. So I think that the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign need to agree on some schedule of debates. I hope that they do 2 and ideally 3, and that they both get after it in front of each other so that those 5 states that are really going to decide this election has an opportunity to make a decision on behalf of the rest of the country.
Yeah, Nick, if you pull that chart back up again, based on Nate Silver's model of polls, where he takes all the polling data that's been collected by different third parties, he weights them based on the performance of those polls in terms of predictive power historically, and he creates this kind of macro model. That's the Nate Silver approach here. He's estimating that within the 80% bound, every state on this list is up for grabs, as you can see with the gray lines shown there. There's a very slight margin on the average in Wisconsin for Trump, in Michigan for Harris, in Pennsylvania for Trump, in Nevada for Trump, in North Carolina for Trump, in Virginia for Harris, and so on. But each of those margins is so slim that there's still quite a lot of decision-making ahead for voters. So pretty clearly on point that this is still very much an open election. I'll give you guys my read. I think that there's 5 camps of voters going into this when Biden was the candidate. The first is anti-Biden, anything but Biden. The second is anything but Trump. The third is pro-Biden. The fourth is pro-Trump. And then the fifth is the other. And I think that that entire bucket of anything but Biden just became available once Biden dropped out of the race. And it was a pretty sizable bucket, that there's a large number of voters out there that felt pretty strongly that Biden poses such a significant risk for leadership in this country because of the mental issues and the performance issues that we had seen, that as much as people didn't love Trump, they were willing to vote for him because he's not Biden. And now that camp has an option, and that option is Harris. So some percentage of that camp, and I would say probably a super majority of that camp, is now switching into the Harris bucket. The pro-Trump bucket doesn't move. The pro-Biden bucket probably doesn't move. It sticks with Harris. And the anything but Trump bucket doesn't move. It sticks with Harris. So, you know, the fact that there is probably such a sizable number of voters in the anything but Biden camp is what's probably helping Harris at this point and creates a bit of a handicap for Trump going into this last stretch of the campaign. That's my read, because I know a lot of people with that point of view.
That's an interesting point of view, and let me just respond to that for a second. So one of our critiques of Biden, not just in this election cycle, but probably going back a year, is that Biden had become basically a figurehead president, almost a construct, and he was fronting for a shadow cabinet or a group of powerful staffers who were really running the country, basically because of his cognitive decline. And we sort of joke that whoever the White House intern was who was running the social media accounts or the staffer who was running the teleprompter was basically the president because they could dictate what Biden said. Now, I think the question to ask is, has anything changed? Kamala Harris refuses to do any interviews. She doesn't want to do any unscripted appearances. She's abandoned all of her policy positions that have been longstanding and were the reason why she ran for president in the first place in 2020. So the question to ask is, do we still have a construct as the president? I mean, the Biden staffers who are running Biden are now just running Harris. We don't know what she stands for. We don't have her appearing in unscripted, natural appearances. We don't have her being challenged by the press. She's not willing to do what Trump did. Trump just walked into the lion's den yet again at the NABJ.
National Association Black Journalists. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So Trump walks into a very hostile interview at NABJ. Harris was supposed to come and she didn't come. She would have gotten a very softball interview. She's not even willing to do that. I think that in substantive terms, I don't think that much has changed this election. The Biden staff is still running for president. I mean, that's what you're voting for.
I would disagree on this because I think in the last 2 weeks, what I've seen is statements coming out of the Harris camp that clearly distinguish her and her campaign from Biden's policy positions and Biden's campaign rhetoric historically. Most particularly, Sachs, is on Israel. When Netanyahu came to visit the United States, she put out a very pro-Israel statement that we all know the Biden camp has largely avoided doing because of the concern over the pro-Palestinian rights movement's reaction to the Biden camp being pro-Israel. And the Harris statement was pretty finely worded and pretty strongly worded that she is very much in favor of Israel defending itself. She acknowledged that there's a loss of Palestinian life that matters, and we need to acknowledge and address it. But she was very much in support of Israel, which is not a position we've seen the Biden camp take. And I think that we're starting to see what is a little bit more of a fracturing between Harris being allowed to be free and being allowed to have an opinion outside of the party line dictated by the Biden camp. And I think we'll probably see more of that in the next couple of weeks. And we'll probably see her starting to be a little bit more refined in what differentiates her from Biden. Because I do think that's what's going to allow her to win this election, is she's going to stand up and say, here's why I am not Joe Biden. And here's what makes me different from that individual. I respect him. I love him. He helped me. But let me tell you why I'm different and why that should matter.
She snubbed Netanyahu, Freeberg. I don't know what you're talking about. She snubbed Netanyahu.
I think you're an example of the people that want to give her the benefit of the doubt. Okay. I think there's a large fraction of those people.
That's not true. No, that's not a fair way to characterize me at all. I'm simply pointing out that she made a statement. I'm pointing out that she made a statement that's different than what Biden said. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Hold on a second. I think on Israel. So first of all, she didn't write that statement. The staff did. Okay. Now, what is the staff trying to accomplish on Israel? They actually have a genuine dilemma on the whole Israel-Palestine issue because the Democrat Party is very much split on this. The Democrat establishment is pro-Israel, but the progressive base is very pro-Palestine. And even polling among youth shows significant support for Hamas even. And a lot of these people are very much within the sort of hardcore left-wing base of the Democrat Party. So what the Biden administration has been doing, and what I think Harris is continuing, is a process of talking out of both sides of their mouth. Biden went to Israel, bear hugged Bibi, basically supported his policy, but then gave some lip service to the idea that he would limit the weapons that Israel is able to use. Harris puts out this very pro-Israel statement, but then snubs Netanyahu at that speech he gave before Congress. So, look, the Democrats are trying to have it both ways. They have a base that is fractured on this issue, and so they're trying to thread that needle. Now, you're right that let's just up-level it. Let's move off the Israel issue for a second. There's no question that Harris wants to run from her record as being Biden's vice president. There's a good reason for that. The Biden-Harris administration is historically unpopular. What you have to ask, though, is whether it's credible. Harris suddenly is in favor of more money for Border Patrol. Well, why didn't she advocate for that when she was Biden's border czar? The media is fiercely scrubbing its websites to remove references. Hold on, they're removing historical references from during the Biden administration when she was openly called the the borders are. They're trying to memory hole that. So look, I have no doubt that the Harris campaign wants to drop every substantive policy position she's ever taken because they just want her to be a construct. They just want people to be excited because.
I do think that what you're saying is exactly what she needs to answer to in public in the next couple of weeks to earn credibility on what is she different from the Biden administration on in terms of policy. And why did she not make that clear when she was in the Biden administration? And she can say, I didn't agree with it, or she can say, I've changed my mind. And I think both of those might end up being where she needs to go to. But you're right, she does need to answer to that.
I don't think it's clear she has to do any of that.
You think she can just hide out and coast?
No, right now the calculation is to get as many people to basically move into the not Trump voting stance. Right. And they're giving as much time as possible to measure that and see if it's a winning strategy. But again, and I think we just talked about this, mathematically, it can win the popular vote, but it will not win the Electoral College. So she is going to have to appear and be in a position where she's confronted on about 4 or 5 key issues. And that's where this presidency is going to get decided. 4 or 5 issues in 4 or 5 states, and we'll all know where she stands. On the border, on the economy. By the way, the problem is, and if you look at what's happening now, we are in a recessionary stance. There's going to be a lot of ink that gets spilled starting in September on the fact that X of a handful of companies were basically in a recession. So that's going to have to get put on the feet of the sitting president and the sitting vice president. So there's a whole set of complicated issues. I think it's smart, actually, for her to strategically kind of stay quiet right now and just kind of see all the goodwill that's pent up to the not Trump candidate is going to flow her way.
Right.
The problem is that that's not enough to sustain yourself for 100 days. And so she's just going to have to take a point of view.
Well, it might be if the press lets her get away with it.
No, because I think, David, I think you're right. Because when you go into a debate or when you go into these places, people will want to know the answers to these questions. And if the media tries to memory hold this thing, I think the thing that they most don't want, which is another Trump victory, will actually happen because of it. Because people will come in, this kind of like ambivalent group of folks that are, or independent group of folks that are looking for very clear point of view on 4 or 5 issues, maybe will come to a rally. And instead of that, they'll hear Megan Thee Stallion and they'll wonder to themselves, well, this is not what I came for. I came to know where you stand on these 4 or 5 issues. So the media actually, in order to give her the best chance of getting elected, and this is counterintuitive to them, which is why they probably won't do it, they'll have to confront her on these issues.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And that's why I invite Vice President Harris onto the All In podcast to join us for a conversation. I think would all really enjoy that. And just to declare my position, I am in camp 5, the other camp. I am not pro or anti either of these candidates. I obviously have issues that I think are far more existential to the longevity of the United States and the Republic that need to be addressed, that don't seem to be a priority for either candidate or either party. As I've mentioned many times on this show, that's where I stand.